one of the most special parts of this weekend for me has actually been my ability to introduce you to my friends like Paris Kidd and Cyrus Raji and Mark Philaday. Tomorrow you will meet Rob Johnson. Dr. Henslin and I have known each other for a very long time.
23 years.
23 years.
Yeah.
And he has been just one of my best friends and was, he's just very special. He is a psychologist. He is also a marriage and family therapist. He is the author of many books, The Brain in Love, and what are the two about fathers and daughters?
Oh yeah, the book, Your Father's Daughter, 3 daughters that had to write a book to learn how to raise them. And then a book on fathers and sons called Man to Man. And then This Is Your Brain on Joy got translated into Russian. So.
This Is Your Brain on Joy.
Yeah.
And he speaks internationally. He treats little kids and old people. He's really good with trauma and families. He's trained in EMDR. He and I have shared thousands of patients. He has literally referred, in fact, he's the reason we have a Southern California clinic. We had a Northern California clinic, and 25% of our referrals were coming from Dr. Henslin. And at some point, I'm like, well, I have to meet him. And it was really the spark for us to come down and open a clinic here. He knows more about psychotherapy and imaging than any other soul on the planet. So he will be with you for the next hour.
It's a delight and an honor for me to be here and have this opportunity to speak. And it'll take me a while to learn how to use this one. And here we go. And it was 23 years ago, I was in a seminar with Dr. Amen on ADD. And it was at a hotel nearby here. And I had read at that time about 5 or 6 books on ADD, and I had so many people coming in, adults on stimulants, so it was like I knew there was just more to learn. And after a while, when you read so many books on a subject, you know, after a while they just sound the same. It's like no one comes up with anything different or innovative. And then his brochure came across my desk, and I still look back at that, and I really see it as something only God could do. And that you could actually go and look at the brain. I mean, it was just mind-blowing to me at that time. You have to think of the context of 22, 23 years ago. And so I went and was part of a group just like you, sitting in the back, as I usually do, and about 250, 300 professionals. And I'm sitting there and I'm just blown away because I had spent 14 years with an amazing family physician. I did that on purpose, so I shared a suite with him. And we would spend our times at noons going over, you know, blood studies and medical testing, because we referred back and forth, and we saw so many things change in people's lives. And it gave me such an appreciation for medicine that you don't get in a clinical psychology program. And so when I met Dr. Amen, I'm sitting back there and it was like the missing piece. It was like, oh my lands. I'm sitting there and it dawned on me that 2 master's degrees and a doctorate were now obsolete. That's not a good feeling. I had a good practice going and everything, and I'm thinking, you know, I can no longer look at a patient when they come in crisis, and I would have a strong background in forensic testing. And psychiatrists would refer to me. I'd do inpatient work, where I go in and do a huge battery of tests to help with assessment, diagnosis, and treatment planning. So I have a lot of background in that. And all of a sudden I realized for a price of a scan, I was going to get more user-friendly information than all the assessment work. And that's what really got me, because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I'm just being right straightforward, you know, if I go down this road in the first year, I'm going to lose 30% of my income. Not a comforting thought. And it actually turned out to be more than that. But then it dawned on me, if I don't go down this road, 10 years later, 20 years later, I don't want to regret that I missed out on an opportunity. Because what if this is the missing piece? What am I going to do 5, 10 years from now if I don't take this step? And the other thing that hit me, and it was rather disturbing, but quite honestly, I like these problems. That's what my ADD motivates me to do. Is in my training, all the models of psychotherapy assume there's such a thing as a normal brain. Not a comforting thought. When you're spending a whole day looking at scan after scan after scan after scan, and all of a sudden the pieces are falling into place, why people can't follow through on things, why they don't connect with feelings, why do they keep relapsing in their addictions, why are there chronic health problems that are going on that there's no movement on? I mean, it was like, oh my lands. And that's when I went up during a break and I talked to Dr. Amen, introduced myself, and I let him know, I think you and I are going to have a long-term relationship. And then that Monday morning, I referred 3 people. And all these people began driving and flying to Northern California. And at that time, there were no physicians here to do the follow-up. And so I began to fly up and meet with Dr. Amen, and he was gracious enough to sit down with me, and we'd spend afternoons just at the monitor going over scan after scan after scan, because I wanted to be able to read the scans. So it's one thing to get the information, but it's a whole other thing to actually apply it. The pictures are nice, they yield a lot of information, but how do you make it live out? How do you make it happen? And so you actually get those changes that people are looking for. And so it was so exciting when he decided to open up the clinic down here, because that allowed us to spend more time together and work more closely together. And there are many times I'm sure it's very frustrating for him because I ask a lot of questions, and I love to learn. Now, I'm supposed to talk about the different questionnaires to use, and you have them in a packet. But what I didn't know is if you got in the packet the Amen Brain Systems checklist, and did you get the one from me that actually breaks it up and shows some scoring and things like that under it? No, maybe not. Well, then what we'll do is I'll make sure that gets emailed to you, and so you have it. Because at that very first seminar, I bought the clinician's guide, the toolbox. I pulled out that Amen Brain Systems checklist, which is what we're going to go over right now. And I started to have everybody fill that out as just part of the initial intake process. And then there were many times in sessions with ongoing clients that already had, I just take out the checklist and go with them. Now, what I would encourage you to do, if you want to, and going through this training, I mean, how many people here are clinicians that are working with people? Okay, that's the majority of the people here. What you want to do, and those of you who are not clinicians, you still use the checklist, and I'll explain how. But what I would encourage you to do is take the one checklist, the Amen Brain Systems checklist, 101 questions, measures 5 different systems of the brain. Prefrontal cortex, limbic, cingulate, basal ganglia, temporal lobes. Now, one of the key things that I learned from Dr. Amen that is part of this whole system and methodology is the realization that my training in clinical psychology, psychiatry, and in medicine is on symptoms. You get a cluster of symptoms, and if they add up with the clinical history you take, you now get a diagnosis. What SPECT brain imaging does, it helps you begin to look at systems. And it's important to understand the brain from a system level because there's 2 systems of the brain that create the same symptoms. And if you're not determining the right system, you're going to end up with the wrong medication, you're going to end up with the wrong supplement, you're going to end up wrong with the wrong therapeutic intervention as a therapist. And when you give this one checklist over and over and over, as I and my staff do with everybody to this day, so now it will be thousands later, and I've taught this in a day-long seminar to clinicians, and how to use this one simple checklist, you have such an amazing tool in your hands. Because in the last 22 years or 23 years of doing this, only, because most of the people come into my practice, they're on an antidepressant or they're on some medication, and only 100% of the time, after I give that AIM and Brain Systems checklist, do I have the data in front of me that says they need a medication change. Only 100% of it. Nothing perfect on this earth, so I know that first person's going to come in one of these days, but it hasn't happened yet. And so when you give that checklist and then start them on a treatment protocol, give it to them 30 days later, give them to it 60 days later. I give it numerous times throughout the course because it's the only measure I have of whether we're actually meeting the need or there's any progress being made. And when you start to give it over and over and over again, because what I did in the early days is that toolkit I went through, they have descriptions of the area of the brain. I'd actually just sit there with looking at the prefrontal cortex scores and then looking at all the symptoms and just learning to make that connection between systems and what they do in the brain. And since the last week in December to this day today, I by myself, and that's not including the rest of the staff, have made 14 referrals for SPECT scans. Because what happens, the strongest referral base anybody has is word of mouth. We all need websites, Twitter, Facebook, and all these things. They all help get the message out. But bottom line, it's still word of mouth. And the people that come in to see us have already been through numerous physicians and therapists and treatment protocols. And my oldest daughter used to work for me until she fell in love and got married and moved to New York. And she said, "Dad, you know you have the reputation for being the last place to go when you're ready to give up hope?" Because the person had called in and said, "Well, we've been to 10 different therapists, 4 different physicians, 2 rehabs. Is this too much for your dad?" So I figured out this is my daughter answering the phone. She goes, "No, I don't think so. He just looks at it all as an interesting puzzle." And that's the way it becomes. Now, okay, there we go. Now, the prefrontal cortex, I just want to kind of give you a hands-on approach to this. You know, the first 28 questions have to do with frontal cortex functioning. And if you get a score of 8 or 9 or more that are frequent or very frequently, that means you got a prefrontal cortex function. And a handout that I'll have, make sure you guys get a copy of, actually breaks it down where there's a whole paragraph right at the end of that prefrontal cortex, because that's what I began to do to help me just have this ongoing feel and make sure I was making an accurate assessment. And then the interesting thing is when you look at prefrontal cortex function, it's all stimulant medications that mainly help that. And so when you know the system, and Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and all of Dr. Amon's books, and in my book, Yours is Your Brain on Joy, that's the way the book is broken down. It shows you all the things you can do to help frontal cortex function. And then the cingulate, which is the gear shifter in the brain, obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors. All of you here have a lot of overactivity in the cingulate because there's no way you get through graduate school and definitely a medical program unless you know how to manage details and you can stay focused and to give you a big project and you make all the details. But then that's the brain, part of the brain that when it's overactive and the basal ganglia is too high, keeps you freaking awake at night. So all those thoughts that are running over and over in your mind are just a sign of an overactivity of the cingulate and the left and right basal ganglia being overactive. The limbic system, questions 46 to 63, are all the symptoms of depression. And I have people rate them, they rate themselves in the self column, and then I have them rate if it's a marital situation, I have them rate their spouse in the other column, and then I have the spouse rate themselves, in the self column, and then they rate the other person in the other column. I tell you, that information is just so fascinating. You know you got a difficult couple when they both rate themselves as normal, and they see the other person as having all the problems, and that's the couple that goes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da back and forth, and they don't listen, they don't process, and things like this. Because this changes, like I told you in that first seminar, I knew it was going to change how I did everything. I have a lot of background in PTSD treatment, going back to the 70s. I mean, I've worked with people from World War II to the present conflict. I worked with people who grew up in Germany, who witnessed things happen as native. I worked with a lady whose father was the first kamikaze pilot, and had a chance through a translator to do some PTSD work with her. So, I mean, I've got a lot of experience in this, but it changed once I realized I had to help the brain first. And then the resolution of the symptoms became a whole lot easier and didn't take as much out of the person. And the limbic system, that one, and from here on out, the cingulate, the limbic system, the basal ganglion, the temporal lobes, anytime there's 5 symptoms or more, the person's in trouble. Now, when you look at the limbic system, this is where SSRIs and SNRIs all work, and then the supplements like St. John's wort, serotonin mood support, excellent one, and on, the other medications, Celexa, 5-HTP, SAMe, wonderful supplement, and the SAMe that's sold here through Dr. Amen's clinic is an excellent, and that's one of the things you start to learn when it even comes to supplements. There's no FDA controls on supplements, and so when people go to a store or Sam's Club or Costco and buy a supplement, what's the likelihood that it's going to be in the bottle as what's on the outside? I have a subscription to consumerlab.com, and monthly they do this random assessment of supplements, and they tell you what's actually in there and what's not. 2 years ago, Costco as an example, their omega-3 fatty acids had traces of lead on them for over 6 months running. And that's what's been nice about Dr. Amen, because I know he anticipates that somebody someday is going to assess all of his supplements, so he stays on top that there's high quality of control. And that's one of the things about supplements, because most patients, coming in, they want to know what can be done naturally, first. And that's wonderful. A lot of people that can be helped with that. Now, the basal ganglia, to me, is the most neglected region of the brain in the entire field of psychology, psychiatry, general medicine, and so on. I get referrals from pain management specialists now asking me to make an assessment, looking at the medication protocol, looking at these tests, and then making my recommendations. I have physicians that do the same thing, because since I spent 14 years with a primary care doctor, I got to know a lot of family physicians, and so they send people to me just for this kind of assessment. Now, the basal ganglia, anxiety thermostat of the brain. And you learn to find those little phrases, and I heard that first from Dr. Amen, that very first seminar, and I've been using it every day since then, and you'll come up with something even better. But it's the region of the brain that actually sets the level of anxiety throughout the whole body, but it influences muscle. So it's not just fear, it's not just phobias, it's not just panic attacks and things like that. What it is it also influences all viscera, all skeletal muscle and tension in the body. And so neck and shoulder tension, headaches, migraines, Some people have upset stomach. I wish I got that under anxiety. All I want to do is eat. I don't feel like not eating. I don't have that missing gene in there. I wish I had some of that. And then diverticulitis, colitis. And the other thing from a pain management standpoint, very simple principle. Since it has to do with emotion and muscle, if it's elevated too high, it means all muscles are tense. And so if you've got, changes going on in the vertebrae, in the neck, the spinal column, any place, any kind of injury, what happens if that muscle tension anxiety center goes up? Well, it tenses every muscle in the body. I had one man come in, a realtor, in order to just go to work. He was seeing a chiropractor 30 times a month because he had chronic migraine head pain and been to all the best medical centers around here. I won't spend time listing them all. And no one was helping him manage that pain. The only relief he got was staying on the recommendations from his pain doctors. But what actually got him to work was going to his chiropractor and then I found out it was really the massage and the electro heating pad stimulation. Well, it relaxed all those muscles. But no one was paying attention to his basal ganglia. And on the basal ganglia checklist, he had like 17 symptoms, And so what I did, talking to his primary care physician, got him started on gabapentin. Gabapentin, wonderful medication, low side effect profile, nails that basal ganglia, calms it right down. Beautiful, not addictive, with all the benzodiazepines and things like that. If we have, and one of the things about the basal ganglia, one of the ways, it's fascinating. There's a whole sleep industry out there. So if you hit them hard with something at nighttime, then they're going to relax enough, to go to sleep at night. And it dawned on me one day, so I grew up on a dairy farm in southeastern Minnesota. One of these days I'm going to write a book. I'm going to call it The Farmer's Approach to Psychotherapy. Because you come up with these principles, once you start to look at them. And it was just as simple. Well, if you manage anxiety well during the day, you're probably going to be able to go to sleep at night. And so with this realtor, what we did, because gabapentin has a half-life, and the PDR talks about between 6 to 8 hours. And it hit me one day, those are averages. What about the people at 5? And what about the people at 9? And I find with people, almost 100% of the time, who come in with 5 or more symptoms on the basal ganglia, they burn up that gabapentin, and it's out of their system by 5 hours. And so then what happens, and like with this patient, and his primary care doctor went along with it because nothing else was helping the man. We started giving it every 5 hours. So 7 in the morning, noon, 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 4 times a day. And when we got him up to about 600 milligrams at each one of those dosing, 1 chiropractor treatment a month, and dropping off to sleep and having a normal sleep cycle. Because sleep is one of the times the brain heals itself, removes toxins and things like that. Melatonin that's rushing through the system, and restful sleep is a great supplement, and we have so many people on that because it's got a quick release melatonin and then a long-term release melatonin, in that particular supplement. Because melatonin as a hormone also is a building block for serotonin during the day. And it also influences dopamine and the frontal cortex, GABA, and everything. So sleep is kind of important. And that's what I found. Another woman, just another quick basal ganglia story, 19 migraines a month. And so much panic, couldn't drive on the freeways, couldn't go on an airplane, gave up going to church. Because when people come in with 7, 8 symptoms of basal ganglia or more, I'll tell them, I know where you sit in church. Or if it's an AA meeting, through an AA, I'll say, I know where you sit at your AA meeting. Exactly, you got it. By the door, at the end of the pew, by a window, by a door. Because if you're in the middle, you'll feel trapped, and that's just the thought of going in there makes you panicky. Well, this lady, she was actually the first one that hit me one day. I asked her, what is it like at hour 5? Because when we got up to 600 milligrams 3 times a day, she went from 19 migraines a month with gabapentin down to 9, which for her was a life changer. Because she started to drive on freeways and she started to be able to sit wherever she wanted. Came in and cried and she said, my friend died. I was able to go up and give a hug to the family members. I could have never done that before. And then when she said, at 5, I can't wait to hour 6, I started to write out my letter to her physician, and I have a monitor. Well, it's about the size of that. It's really a TV on my desk. And so when I write the letter, they're looking at it because I want to make sure I report their experience accurately, and they see it. And then I'm not doing letters after the hour, which, you can add another 10 hours a day just with notes, and that's why I try to do as much of it in the session as possible. And when they see it tied to their care, no one complains. They're thankful that you take the time to do that. And so I looked at her and I said, you're going to up that before you get in to see him, aren't you? And she said, well, yeah, I'm in pain. I said, we're going to run out, and you're going to have to go in early. I know. And this physician is a friend of mine. I said, well, he's going to lecture you, and he's going to call me up and tell me I'm prescribing now, and going to say my license should go away. And I'm telling you, you cannot increase this till you go in and you talk with your doctor about it. And I'm sending him the note that you need it. He may just call you and say it's okay. Well, what does she do? She starts it right away, every 5 hours, and even woke up, and for a while she went 6 times. She even woke up in the middle of the night to take another gabapentin, went down to 1 migraine a month just with that change. So that's why it's so important to notice, the half-life and how long it's lasting, because with anxiety, the moment that starts to leave, boom, they're back in torturous anxiety and pain again. And then she stopped coming. And I said, well, why are you, so I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. I said, I know we can get rid of these so you don't have them anymore. And she laughs. She says, well, you and I know the last one is my husband. I'm just not ready to deal with that. I'll be back. And that was the truth. She wasn't at a point ready to deal with that. So the basal ganglia, when you dial that in, my lance, it affects pain management things, not just anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and things like that, but health issues of all types. Because when you got high anxiety like that, there's adrenaline and cortisol rushing through the system and so on. And so that's harming the immune system. And I've had people, like one woman, white counts were over 100,000, being treated for leukemia, referred to me because, she's headed for death and wanted me to help her deal with that and work with the family and so on. And so give the checklist and so on. And then I find out that her husband is a rager and they have 2 kids that are still at home. And I looked at her and I said, I can't believe I said this. I never said this to anybody since then. And I said to her, it's morally wrong for you to die and leave those 2. Oh man, she got upset. But then she was motivated and we did an intervention. He went into treatment for alcoholism. During the 30 days he was in treatment, her white counts went down to 15,000. The oncologist, the primary care doctor, all called me up and says, what in the world are you up to now, Henslin? I said, we can't figure this out. Why is this changing? And when she came in, I said, I don't know that you have a leukemia problem. I think you have a boundary problem. That's when I learned the basal ganglia. When you talk about helping people set boundaries in destructive relationships and so on like that, there's material I'm working on now. It's really like the neuroscience of boundaries. Because you ever had the experience, you're working with a patient and you've done a lot of work with them, educated them, motivated them to set that boundary with that violent spouse, but yet they keep staying in it over and over again? Well, the boundary part is, when that basal ganglia goes up, there's a whole group of people, then the frontal cortex shuts down. And you get a deer in headlights situation. They cannot access all the recovery meetings, the healing experiences they've had with you in therapy, the encouragement that you've given them and so on. It's not available. And that just changed a whole nother level of paradigm for me in terms of boundaries. Because then, when you get to the, oops, I went the wrong way. Yeah, here we go. Neurontin, GABA, triol GABA, lamictal, topamax, trileptal, GABA calm, neurocalm, serotonin, mood support, all help the left and right basal ganglia. And even omega-3 fatty acids help with the basal ganglia. Trileptal is one that we recommend a lot because you can't give gabapentin to somebody who has any hint toward bipolar. So if they have any quick ups or quick downs, you don't go with gabapentin. But because that can actually make a person suicidal, and that's what all those lawsuits were about with Neurontin back several years ago. Trileptal, awesome medication. Again, low side effect profile, but you got to watch out for hypertonuria. I can't pronounce that right. Anyway, they lose too much salt and they can get arrhythmias and things like that. But what we notice that trileptal, as it dial it up, calms down the basal ganglia, stabilizes it, works better on stabilizing the temporal lobes, and actually is good with a lot of bipolar 2. Bipolar 1's a whole other thing. I won't get into that right now. But that's where trileptal is very, very good. Lamictal, good medication in terms of mood swings, but it doesn't do anything for the basal ganglia. That's what kind of hit me about these meds. And that came from just giving the checklist over and over and over and over again. If you have somebody coming in, they're already on Lamictal, their moods might be stable, but they got panic attacks, what does that tell you? That basal ganglia is not being touched by that medication. Isn't that exciting? Just with this one checklist. You leave here and you start to apply this every day, then you'll be as crazy as I am all these years later. Not that that's a goal, but looking at it, and then when I sit down with patients and I draw out a short diagram, which I'll show you in a minute, and I show what their current meds are taking and what they're doing and not doing, and then I tell them, which is truthful, I don't know what's going on with your frontal cortex. So the only way you can find out about frontal cortex function is with a brain scan. Because if there's a drop in perfusion, you can't tell that you can take a chance by giving it a stimulant, but I tell you, it's a whole lot better when you got the data right in front of there to see that frontal cortex and that there's that dropout in perfusion. And then the other thing, like what Dr. Amon's already talked about, I'm sure, is head trauma. People have this thing, you have to be knocked out to have head traumas. We're crazy. I've had neurologists shout that at patients. Reading a letter from me, he says, you don't have head trauma, you haven't been knocked out. When they were in a car accident, days after, sometimes seizures, all kinds of other symptoms, post-concussive symptoms later, there's no doubt. Brain's the consistency of tofu, the only cushionings, membranes and fluid inside a hard, bony structure, and all it takes, if I slap my hands together, That causes the brain to bounce around, and it's going to be injured. And that's helpful information to have, because if you're following the guidelines and everything and you don't get the response, well, if you got sufficient trauma going on in the temporal lobes and the frontal cortex, you're not going to get the usual supplement or medication response. Sometimes it means you have to start out lower, titrate up slower. I mean, there's all kinds of variations of the scheme. But I tell you, it helps the patient when they can see, when they've been reading the books, why am I not responding? And then you can say, well, if you look at your frontal cortex and your temporal lobes here, this is why. And then they get more motivated to walk, to maybe come here, get some HBOT treatment, neurobiofeedback, and all the different ways that you can, transcranial magnetic stimulation, to help. They're all beautiful tools, to help the Fisher-Wallace device. But then you've got the data, because in sessions, I have the scans up on that monitor most of the time. And I'll tell you why in a reason. Temporal lobes. Now, in all the years of referring to Dr. Amen for the brain images, for the SPECT scans, whenever there are 5 symptoms or more on the temporal lobes, only 100% of the time have the scans come back with temporal lobe instability or some injury or something like that to the temporal lobes. And quite honestly, it's been true with the other systems of the brain too. Because many times when I write a report and I put in the Amen Brain Systems checklist, I'll put in high probability overactivity in left and right basal ganglia, high probability injury, drop in perfusion in the frontal cortex, overactivity in the thalamolimbic system, and so on. And then you get the scan, you go back and read it, that checklist is right on the money. I mean, it's really neat. I've even given court testimony. I've been sworn in a criminal trial, and I gave that information. I don't know, those opposing counsel just didn't know how to question me on it. But that was kind of interesting. Now, the temporal lobes, Neurontin, gabapentin, and basically a lot of the things that help the basal ganglia, abilified geodone omega-3 fatty acids. And in bipolar 1, there may be a need for an antipsychotic. My concern with, this is my observations, and I'm just telling you what I've observed over 20 plus years of scans, is sadly, so many people come in to my practice with sleep problems and they've been given risperidone, Zyprexa, or Seroquel. I think that's just wrong. I'll tell you why. Everybody that comes in that's been on any of those novel antipsychotics, when we got a scan, they've been on it for more than a year or two, they show some atrophy in the frontal cortex. Because one of the ways those medications work is by inhibiting dopamine in the frontal cortex, and it shuts off a person's thinking. That's why they go to sleep. And on the physician's side, are you sleeping? Yes. And so you get the information you need. But you always have to ask, what is it like in the morning? Because when you wipe out dopamine in the frontal cortex at night, now it's going to take 2-3 cups of coffee and several Monsters and those energy drinks just to get going. And I'll say that to them, well, I guess you must take several Monsters depending on the age range, a lot of coffee, and any caffeine you can get hold of so you can wake up enough to get to work on time. And I bet you're not mentally alert till 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And they'll look at me and say, how do you know these things? It's just observation, listening to people, and understanding the system of the brain. That's why it's so exciting to talk with you, because you walk out just with that one bit of information on systems versus symptoms. It changes how you look at everything. And for all the physicians here, it's so exciting that you're here, because when you start to do these scans, I had a lady with a 5 or 6-year-old child her church raised the money in Minneapolis, Minnesota to fly down to get a scan and to see me. And this kid, ADHD with, bipolar kinds of things at an early age, and they had been through so many therapists, things like that. And you could tell that these parents were just good, hardworking parents, 5 kids, no money. Church thinks enough of them to raise the money to send them out there. So there's a lot of good support going on there. Mom comes in. I go over the scan with her as the boy, trying to keep the boy from climbing my bookshelves, And it reminds me I should have gotten those things anchored. You don't want a bookshelf to come over at somebody. And I looked at her, and I looked at this scan. It was a ring of fire lit up like a Christmas tree. And I looked at her and I said, this has got nothing to do with what you did or did not do as a parent. She fell apart sobbing. Yeah, but they said at the University of Minnesota in family therapy and things like that. I said, I know, they're good professionals. They just haven't had a chance yet. Your child is wired differently than your other 4. Of course, the other 4 are all straight A's and athletes and all these things. You've been there. In family systems therapy, this is called the identified patient. That language now is outdated. Throw it away. Makes no sense. Because if a child is wired differently, it takes a whole different strategy. They cannot function to respond to normal parenting if they don't have a regular brain. So can you see what I mean? Like what's hit me? Because I have a lot of training. I taught in a doctoral program 6 years family systems therapy. I'm known to be pretty good at this stuff. And all of a sudden I realized, oh no. Because now I educate people and we come up with a strategy that's designed for an ADD brain or a high basal ganglia brain or something. You teach a father, when he got the evidence that his daughter or child has got basal ganglia that's got lit up like Christmas trees, that you have to watch the tone of your voice. And you got to speak softly. Don't come up quickly. Don't move your hands quickly. Things like that. And then a lot of these guys would look at, what's wrong with you? I said, that's okay. I know where she got part of her brain just from your response. Your basal ganglia is so high, you just get irritated at everybody. Wife looks at me in fear, which tells me what goes on in this household. Why don't we talk about you getting a scan? I really think you don't like getting that angry at home. No one's told me anything. But you can tell, with just watching the kids and the wife and how they respond, their anxiety's going up. And in that particular situation, he says, yeah, I do need help. Because when I reference it as a medical issue, and believe me, that comes across a whole lot stronger from an MD than it does somebody with a doctorate in clinical psychology. Then they get motivated. Because they want change. They just don't know how to get there. And the temporal lobes, to me, you can toss all anger management programs out the window. I have a few opinions. But it's only based on 20-some years now of brain imaging. Because that person might do well while they're in the structure of that program, but once the pressure's off and the district attorney, is signed off on his part, they go back to raging again. Because they probably got some head trauma, they got instability in the temporal lobes. And I have one man, his wife came in, it's his 4th marriage. They'd been married for 10 years. Top salesman of the company. He even punched out the owner in anger one day, but they just kept him more outside away from everybody because he's so good in sales. And so I'm listening to his story. I spent $125,000 on legal fees my first marriage and still wouldn't let me see the children. All he's doing is confirming there's a massive temporal lobe problem. Now, Do you notice a change in the thinking there? Now it's just normal to talk in terms of a brain system. Not the fact that he's an adult child of an alcoholic and he's been abused, and all those things were true. That's true too. And do he need help with that? Of course. What's the likelihood of consistent healing with that if you don't have the brain working better, though? That's what's fascinating to me. And I'm the one that makes my living one session at a time doing therapy with people. And I'll tell them, I said, the best use of your money right now is to get this scan. And so this guy storms out after I told him he needed a brain scan. He was a college football player, and he'd had car accidents and all these things. And wife looks at me in fear, and she says, what am I going to do? Just keep your boundary. You're going to divorce him if he doesn't come back. It'll take him 2 weeks. He'll rant and rave. You just leave the house when he does that. And so 2 weeks later, they're back. He's hanging his head like a little puppy dog. And he says, well, I want that scan. Now, this is when Dr. Amen only had the clinic in Fairfield. And so then they went up there, they got the scan, came back, injury to the temporal lobes, high basal ganglia, instability in the temporal lobes, injury in the frontal cortex, a little bit like Donald Trump. You know, he just kind of says whatever comes to mind. I'd love for Dr. Amen to scan Donald Trump. I think he would be an amazing president if he thought before he said something. In the Brain and Love book, I have a whole section on no forethought means no foreplay. You know, so you think that through before you say it or do it. The mood's going to be gone, and it's going to be another 2 weeks before they're interested again. You know, and so I say that to couples. You know, they look at me and say, "How do you know?" Well, I don't know. I just know the brain. You know, and that's what goes on. Because you see that, if you see 17 systems on the frontal cortex, do you think that person thinks before they say or do anything? No. Are they going to be able to concentrate enough to follow through on your suggestions? No. Are they in a high likelihood of relapse if they're a drug addict? You're darn right. But now it's talking in the language of systems, not just symptoms. And that's what's exciting to me, because you're all part of that. And you'll take this information and take it to a whole nother level. Because I tell you, all the books on parenting and marriage and everything all need to be rewritten. You encourage a person to read a self-help book and it doesn't take in the brain. I explain to people, well, this book is not going to cover this, it's going to help you. But if you're having trouble actually putting those principles into place, we just need to look at your brain a little bit more. Well, let me go on to the next slide. Now, I imagine I might be getting close to the end here. And, huh?
You got 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes, okay. Well, then I'll go back to this. I thought I had a slide in here which I didn't have. Imagine this. I draw this out every day with people. It's a pyramid. Basal ganglia, temporal lobes. That's the base of the pyramid. And I tell them this is the foundation of the brain. This is where fight and flight takes place. Because if that anxiety, basal ganglia scores up, and I'll point out to them, I'll use this illustration. Let's just imagine this. I'll say, if from here to here is normal anxiety, your 12 symptoms say to me, you're here. Here's panic attacks. Overwhelmed, I can't think. Phobias, stuff like that. You don't have any room. And so you get quickly irritated, you get angry before you want to. Or you go in inner-directed anxiety, and you just can't talk. And that one little example helps people so much. And this is why you're not sleeping at night. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, researcher at the UCLA, wrote a wonderful book on OCD. I found this one paragraph in there that was just fascinating to me. That there's a ligand, chemical pathway between the left and right basal ganglia and the cingulate. And when I saw that, I thought, now I know why gabapentin, or the supplements GABA, when you calm that down, people are less obsessive. And because there's a chemical pathway right there that's influenced by GABA, or omega-3 fatty acids help as well. The big thing with omega-3 fatty acids, not only the heart and all the other issues that's so important, is cellular membrane permeability. And so the higher they get with the omega-3 fatty acids, the more benefit they get from the multivitamin, the medication they're using, and things like that. Or if it's a supplement approach, supplements are going to reach the brain first, faster. Now there's a chewable Pharma GABA you can get in any vitamin store, and he has Pharma GABA in restful sleep. I have people get this chewable form that they can stick in their pocket or purse because they feel anxiety building, because you can dial things in perfectly and under a highly stressful situation, and then they chew it up, keep it in the side of their mouth or under their tongue just because it gets to the brain. And I've been able to, with some people, eliminate using Xanax, to cut that off if they catch themselves quick enough in that arousal cycle. And they carry it right there, and they know exactly how many to chew up, and do. And it saves a whole other problem that Xanax can get with prolonged issue. Huh?
What's the name of the product that you...
Pharma GABA.
Pharma GABA?
Yeah, Pharma, and then the word GABA. Now, the foundation, basal ganglia, temporal lobes. The next level is the limbic and the cingulate. And then the top of the pyramid is the prefrontal cortex. And so I give them that AMEN brain systems checklist. I draw that little diagram out, and I put the numbers by there, and then I write in the medications. And what I'll do, because I thought I put it in there, but I didn't, I have a PowerPoint slide that shows the system and the medications and the supplements that affect that system. And I'll make sure that you guys get that. Yeah, but what's been so exciting, like I write down, Cymbalta, Lexapro, Prozac, whatever is there, and then you get a gauge of how effective that is. So if they got 12 limbic systems, then you know there's something wrong. They might need that MTHFR gene test, because they're having they may have that gene mutation. And that's an important gene mutation to find out about, because when I started to learn about for depression, and I started to research it, and I realized, oh my gosh, there's all these cardiovascular problems that are connected with that MTHFR gene. So you're also helping heart health if they have that gene mutation and you identify it and you give them Deplin, things like that. There is a supplement, L-methylfolate, but the problem with that is you have to take a half a bottle of that to get what the Deplin medication would be. Because people, they Google and they find out L-methylfolate and they find it on Amazon, but it doesn't do the same thing. They would have to take more.
Can you mention the mutation again?
MTHFR. Yeah. And it's amazing, there's more insurances that seem to be covering that, so it's not that they always have to pay for that. But then because in your history, because when I do a history, to refer somebody for a scan, I go through every medication and I find out what response they have. And if I get a bunch of them, they've tried 7, 8 different ones, and there's no response, then I tell them to go ahead and get that MTHFR gene mutation test. And it's amazing the percentage of people that come back that actually have that mutation. And then the top of the pyramid is the prefrontal cortex. So basal ganglia, temporal lobes, foundation, limbic, cingulate, the next step up, prefrontal cortex, top of the pyramid. To me, God has order in everything. Because when you look at that foundation, fight or flight, and you look at the functions of those systems in the limbic and cingulate, because loving feelings, pain, hurt, and everything, what chance do they have of even dealing with those if you don't have that fight or flight? All they do is they end up living it out in your office. On one session, so it had to be the last one of the day, because one of those make it or break it sessions. 2.5, 3 hours later, connect with all these feelings. They're hugging each other in the session. And I'm thinking, wow, this is cool. And they walk out, people, they walk out and they go talk in the parking lot. I made the mistake of looking in the parking lot and found out that they were arguing there in the parking lot. And I thought, oh my gosh, the half-life of my psychotherapeutic intervention was from here to the parking lot. I mean, you start to think differently when you understand the brain. It was like you start looking at half-lives of everything and what they last, because if they don't hit it right on the nail, there's going to be problems. And then it started dawning, I wonder how long this intervention lasts. And just this past Friday night, I was doing an interview with this dear young lady in Oklahoma, some small town in Oklahoma, on Skype. Her family and her church are all putting the money together to fly her out here to get a scan. Bright young lady, early 40s, horrible divorce, minimum wage jobs, has a college degree, but everything, when you get to asking what kind of remarks you get at work, well, I take too long on things, I make so many mistakes and things like that. And so, basal ganglia, and I went through all the medications she's been on. Basal ganglia had like 15 symptoms. Cingulate had 10. Temporal lobes actually weren't that bad, but she was in a car accident, so I know they're damaged. And 20 depressive symptoms, even though she's on Effexor. And the cingulate off the charts, and 14 frontal cortex symptoms. So what does that tell you about the effectiveness of the Effexor? It's just not working, is it? And Effexor has a side effect, as do Cymbalta, Lexapro, and so on, of making the basal ganglia worse. And that's why most of you end up prescribing Klonopin or something like that later to help manage some of the anxiety. It's just from a side effect of that antidepressant. That's why basal ganglia temporal lobes first. So I explained that to her. She's looking at it on Skype. I switch the screen where she can look at the desktop. Write out my little chart. And I notice is that she says, boy, my basal ganglia is really in rough shape, isn't it? She's using the language. No wonder I'm not doing well at work. And they're close to firing me, because for the frontal cortex like that, I explained to her what normal was and so on. Started to sob. And we went on, and she made more comments about the brain. And then I said to her, you just put together everything. She says, what do you mean? You felt some tears, you felt safe talking to me, your anxiety went down, your frontal cortex kicked in. You were picking up everything I said about those systems of the brain. Now you're telling me. I've taught in doctoral programs where in the course of 20 minutes that we just did this last part, they didn't have that understanding. You are so sharp. We got to think about how you can go to graduate school. Oh, I don't have the money. I said, that's not the issue. People are helping you get here. God will provide. Besides that, there's the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and when you come back showing a scan with the brain trauma and the ADD, you're going to meet all the criteria that Division of Vocational Rehabilitation needs, and they're going to pay for your graduate school education. And I've had that happen so many times now with the bright brain information. They can't say no to people. So, am I happy I made that decision 22 years ago? You bet. This May, I'm going to be 65. Everybody, when they come in, they start to ask how old I am, and I tell them, I said, are you going to retire? And I said, why would I? This is fun. Because when you can make a difference, and the thing about this, there are no experts in this field. Because one bit of research, one bit of information keeps changing the model and the paradigm. We all really start out at an equal level. So just focus on that Amen Brain Systems checklist. Start to use that in how you gauge for therapy or medications or supplements. And you'll find it'll be easier motivating people even to get a brain scan. So that's the news from the Amen Clinic, where all the women are strong, the men are good looking, and the kids are above average.